All right, we finally arrived at the end of the Smart Protein Summit 2021. It's been 3 wonderful days of discussion, talking about the state of the industry, charting a roadmap for the future, and then mapping out those intersections with public and planetary health. We've had a huge number of insights across very many sessions and roundtable discussions. And I'm extremely excited to close the summit with this particular session because we're welcoming here a great friend of GFI's, a great personal friend as well, Dr. Uma Valeti, who's been an absolute inspiration in the space. I'm not going to read his entire bio because, like with many people, that could take up the entire session here today. But Dr. Uma Valeti was actually born in Andhra Pradesh in India. He was medically minded. He moved to the US and he got his medical degree there. He worked at Mayo Clinic. He's led the American Institute of Cardiology. He's done a lot of really impressive things in his life. And then he decided to enter the smart protein space. I'm going to stop there and we're going to dive into Uma's journey because the story is as impressive as anything else that we've heard over these 3 days of the summit. So Uma, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Varun, it's great to be here and I'm really honored to be on your closing session. And I'm expecting you had a wonderful 3 days and I can't wait to be there on the live summit when you have the live meetings. So, being from India, I'm so excited that GFI is kickstarting the India Protein Summit and also championing a number of things that are going to be absolutely essential and critical going forward for the world.
Thank you, Uma. And before we dive into your story, I want to ask you about what's going on behind you, because this is a very interesting, exciting setting in which you're conducting this conversation. So could you tell us a little bit about where you are right now?
Of course, yes. So what I have behind me is not a screensaver. It's actually the world's first and also the largest cultivated meat production facility and an innovation center. We just opened it on Thursday last week. And in fact, this is the first meeting that we are telecasting or live broadcasting from the innovation center. We call it EPIC. And in short, it's Engineering Production Innovation Center for Cultivated Meat.
Yeah, that is really just amazing. I mean, I can't stop smiling thinking about it. This is literally science fiction that is being turned into reality as we speak. So let's go right to the beginning. Uma, a lot of people know your story, but I'd love for the audience here to understand it a little bit better. You're in the US, you're a medical doctor. Why make the switch to growing meat from cells? It's kind of a weird decision, isn't it?
Yes, on the face of it, it absolutely does not make any sense. And it still doesn't make sense to a number of people, including some of my family members. But here's the thing. I think doing the work that we're doing now at Upside Foods is something that is probably once in a lifetime opportunity for any human on the planet. And when I started thinking about my work as a cardiologist and maybe saving another 2,000 or 3,000 lives if I practice for another 30 years versus the opportunity to be able to positively impact billions of human lives and save trillions of animal lives, it was an unbelievable, way to look at things of like, what would our life do the most and have the biggest impact in the lifespan we have? It seemed like it was not even close to continue working as a cardiologist versus trying to say, let's innovate, change the food system for good, and try to make the loved food we eat a force for good. And that was in short the reason why I moved away from cardiology, a field I absolutely loved, but felt like the impact that we can have on the world so much more for our kids, our future generations. And that was a simple reason for the switch. But of course, things like this happen for a reason. And growing up in India, I was really motivated to see certain things happen, which bothered me a lot when I was growing up. And that was also a motivation that really, I think, pushed me forward to move from cardiology to this, plus family. So I'm happy to get into the story. The more you want. It's complicated, but all the dots looking back are easy to connect, as you know. But I grew up in Vijayawada. Vijayawada is a small, city in Andhra Pradesh. Probably not small now by any standards, but I grew up in Vijayawada and I grew up in a meat-eating family. And loved eating meat, loved the taste of meat. But when I was 12 years old, I went to a birthday party of my friend. And in the front of the house, we were having the celebrations, the music, the fun, the food. And dancing, and I walked to the back of the house, and that's where they were, slaughtering the animals to feed the people in the front, and it became that birthday, death day dynamic in my head, where it was really hard to see the amount of incredible joy in the front, and also the tough suffering that had to be done to feed the joy in the front. And as a kid, it was really hard to process. And I just tucked it away in the back of my head and kept eating meat and loved the taste of meat. And it was only in medical school when I went to Pondicherry in Jipmer that I started understanding a lot more about science. And, I went to a large scale slaughterhouse, and that was really hard. So I stopped eating meat in medical school, and later on came to the United States to train at the Mayo Clinic in cardiology. And that's really where all parts started coming together. We were working on stem cells. We were working on regrowing the heart muscle. And I was in my practice later on injecting them into patients' hearts to regrow heart muscle when they had a heart attack. So that's where the question came. If you can do that, can you grow food from animal cells? And once that thought came into my head over 15 years ago, it was really hard to get it out. And that was the origin of the idea, where can you grow food from animal cells, real meat from animal cells, and poultry and seafood. And that led to me establishing a research lab at the University of Minnesota, and very quickly realizing that it should not be in academia, but it should be in the real world. And wrote to one venture capitalist in San Francisco, and they immediately loved the idea and asked us to move the company to San Francisco. So that's what started the journey of Upside Foods, and also this whole industry in general, because like you said, this whole field was in the realm of science fiction even 5.5 years ago. And Upside Foods was the first company that came out and started showing how we could grow meat from animal cells. And the rest of it is what we're watching in front of us unfold for the last 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Uma. And so as you said, look, Upside Foods, incorporated as Memphis Meats earlier, was the first company in this space. And at Upside, you've gone from strength to strength, and this is still the beginning of that journey, right, in terms of getting to scale. The cultivated meat industry in total has now raised from venture capital about $1.3 billion. And I was looking at the figures yesterday. Over half of that has come this year in 2021, right? So momentum is certainly picking up in the funding landscape. But I think people might still struggle to understand exactly how large the scope of the challenge here is and where we need to get 10 years from now. So could you paint a picture in terms of where are we going in cultivated meat? What is the potential size of this industry in 2030 globally?
Yeah, thanks, Varun. It's always hard to predict going forward, but looking back, I can tell you the last 5 years journey seemed incredibly hard and nearly impossible because it was in the realm of science fiction, but one step in front of the other is what really made this industry progress. Just starting to show the first 50 grams of beef we produced, we cooked it in front of the world. The first pound of chicken and duck we produced, we cooked it in front of the world, invited a number of people to come and taste it, independent tasters and journalists like the Wall Street Journal. And they started writing about it and started sharing about this field. So it doesn't remain in the stealth mode and people start having those conversations because it's a new way of producing meat, but it's the same product we all love. And it was important, it was really important to have those start very early, even before the product was ready to hit the shelves or the restaurants. What's happened since then was a number of other people started companies in this space across the world. Nearly 100 companies in every meat producing or meat consuming countries have started. And those brave entrepreneurs have been able to go out and talk to their local communities, academics, investors, regulators, to bring them up to speed on the awareness of the opportunity here. And that led to a number of other people showing their products. And as you know, I'm sure many of them have talked at this conference, that has created a level of excitement across the board for many stakeholders, media, academia, industry, regulators, and frankly, the industry incumbents who started realizing people love eating meat. That means they need to have more of it produced in a much more scalable and a sustainable way without having the incredible downsides of animal agriculture, animal welfare, environmental impact, and also the final opportunity to make meat better. And those are the things that are established and have been established in the last 5 years as an opportunity. Looking forward for the next 10 years, the industry is going into a very different phase in its life cycle. I think the next 5 years is all about showing industrial process and scale. So just like the production facility we are sitting in here, it's about 55,000 square feet. there's a lot of industrial equipment in there, which is like a brewery where you're growing meat directly from animal cells. And you can start seeing how meat can move from the smallest vial of cells to a much larger cultivator to a gigantic cultivator. And then it's harvested, and that meat is then cooked in front of you and under one roof. You're walking through a production facility and seeing the earliest breeds of cells to the final, whether it's a chicken nugget or a chicken tikka masala or so, being cooked in front of you. That's the experience that has to happen in the 5 years, industrial scale of showing people how meat can be produced so they can understand it. Students, high school students, college students, investors, the general public, the media have to come through, walk and see and say, this I can get behind. I absolutely love how we can have the level of transparency in meat production. And that's what needs to happen in the next 5 years. I expect us and a number of other companies will start production facilities like this in their communities and start the education process. I'll see a significant amount of investment dollars. I mean, $1.3 billion is great. It's a start, right? We need 10x more in the next 2-3 years to be able to start building up the industrial scale. And then the next 5 years after that is all about starting to say, where can we bring these products to market? Initially, the scale is, even though there's a lot of investment going in, the supplies are going to be limited. So I would expect Upside Foods and other companies to be able to start introducing it into local restaurants and smaller retail. And then people start getting really excited about it. And then the governments need to start stepping in. In the absence of it, it'll remain a niche. That's what it is. People who can afford it will be able to buy it. But the massive opportunity for governments I see is the ability to accelerate an industry that creates enormous amounts of food safety, food security, jobs, new levels of education and opportunities for their own population, and being able to withstand crises like we just went through with COVID, where supply chains were affected in a way that no one could have been able to predict. Our food system was resilient, but there were gaps. And I think those are the gaps we want to start closing with being able to produce meat locally or regionally in any area across the world. And I'd say that's the next 10-year journey. And looking back in 10 years from now, my wish for this field is there will be 50 to 250 of these large-scale production facilities across the world that are producing, hundreds of millions or even a billion plus of pounds of meat, which approximately is still a small percent, a single-digit percent of the meat in total in the world in 10 years. So my 2030 vision would be, somewhere in the range of 1 to 5% of global meat production will come from cultivated meat. But between 2030 and 2040 is the most exciting time for, I'd say hyperscale. That's where I'd like to get from 1 to 5% of the global meat production to 30 to 40%. And that's really where I think governments getting involved now will set themselves up to take the big opportunity to be the protein producers of the world. And I think India is really well positioned for that with the young population, the high level of education, the focus on infrastructure spending. I mean, these are all the right things to talk about, but the opportunity is moving really fast. There's a number of countries that are talking to us about saying, what can we do to bring you into our area? I think that's where I really hope that this summit can accelerate conversations with the government as well as the private sector in India.
Yeah, let's stay with that thought. I mean, Uma, you mentioned $1.3 billion. That's great from private VC. But I mean, let's compare it, we've been talking all day today as well as through the course of the summit about renewable energy as being very analogous to this, and what needs to happen in this space is analogous to what's happened in renewables, right? I mean, 2020 renewables absorbed 500 billion with a B dollars worth of funding, as well as 32 billion with a B of public innovation R&D spending. And we are not even a blip on the radar compared to that, right? We're talking about 1.3 billion in cultivated meat in history, right? Yes. So I think there's a huge opportunity here. And as much as we're throwing around these figures, they actually pale in comparison to the size of this challenge. So let's stick with that question or that point that you just made about governments. Could you speak a little bit further? Because you grew up in India, you've spent some time here now back and forth, obviously not as much over the last couple of years with some things going on, and also some exciting milestones in Upside Foods' life cycle. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from you in terms of what India can do to compete for this global industry or the broader smart protein landscape as well.
Yeah, great question. I was in India in 2018 and spent time in Delhi at the ICMR and also in Hyderabad at the CCMB, and incredible institutions that have enormous amount of research expertise. But if we start really thinking about an opportunity for India, with the population of India and the young population and the high level of interest in education, this is a field that's going to require highly skilled, employees and people that have the ability to understand, operations, biology, food chemistry, chemical engineering. These are fields that India is really well suited to continue to invest in. But I think what's missing right now at the moment in India is that large amounts of financing and research funding needed to be able to actually give people a hope that, look, this industry is something that will grow and the government of India is going to be behind that. And I think that messaging can be done a lot more effectively, right? All the way from, from Delhi or the state governments, but also Good Food Institute and NGOs like the Good Food Institute are doing a tremendous job, but they need funding as well. If I think about how this could work, like for instance, when we are producing billions of pounds of meat, right? We have the right animal breeds to do that, but what the animal cells need is an entire supply chain to feed them, which means the current, way of manufacturing feed for animals can be started to look at as converting as getting the food from animal cells. And there's a very high value opportunity to have those supply chains shift from making feed for animals to food from animal cells. Then there's also the opportunity to be able to manufacture, Tata Steel. Everybody knows about Tata Steel. And then there's Jindal. And there's a lot of these very large infrastructure entities in India that can start thinking about manufacturing. How do you support fabrication of the cultivators? How do you support the shifting of the supply chains? And then finally, India's been the food bowl, the rice bowl of the world. And why can't India be the protein bowl of the world, right? Start challenging the government to start thinking through what are the ways to attract companies to come to India, but also to locally support companies that are starting in India to say, look, you could be the protein leader in the world. That I think requires a pretty active level of encouragement from the government with proofs to show, like they've actually done research funding for academia. They've actually supported industry to come to India to offer incentives to say, look, you should set up your supply chains here. You should set up your manufacturing and fabrication here, because frankly, Upside Foods would be very interested to do so. And I imagine lots of other companies would want to, but there has to be a matching infrastructure commitment there. And like you said, if it's 500 billion for energy, food is just as big. So we are at 1 billion. So that's a 500-fold, and countries are going to step in. I imagine United States is going to step in a big way. I expect, in Asia Pacific, China to step in a big way. And there comes India, with the population we have, the education we have. I think absolutely an enormous opportunity for the Indian government.
Uma, so on the other side of this equation, you've talked a lot now about the inputs, and they are extremely important. And obviously that's what we're trying to stimulate here in India with this roadmap for the future. Could you speak a little bit to the other side of the equation? I mean, if we get it right, what do you think we'll be able to accomplish by way of an affordable or sustainable supply of protein in this part of the world? Because most people are right now thinking about our industry as being burgers for guilty Americans, right? So can we build a vision of what is possible, maybe in the 20-year time frame or the 5-year time frame? What is possible in terms of catalyzing that supply of nutrition for the developing world?
I think when I said India could be the protein bowl, like it's the rice bowl for the world, right? So in order for that to happen, manufacturing has to be set up in India. If that happens, that means you're creating food production valleys. Just like Silicon Valley, you have a protein valley in India. And if you start thinking of a protein valley, what does that look like? It looks like a seamless opportunity for industries in the US or in Europe or in Asia to come and set up their production entities or manufacturing entities there. It looks like local grown companies can set up their manufacturing entities there. And there is an entire connected network of workforce there, whether it's feeding in from the universities or maybe feeding in from the industries, that workforce can actually be sustained in this protein valley. And that really then means there is pretty significant amount of government incentives to come in and set up economic free zones. I mean, a number of countries we are talking to are literally setting up economic free zones for companies to come in and start bringing knowledge there, bringing high level of expertise in terms of growing food in a new way, and that requires being competitive. And India will need to be competitive in setting up those, because the big opportunity is being able to manufacture and being able to supply the 1.3 billion people that will live in India and have some self-sufficiency of being able to produce meat and types of meat that maybe are not common in India for various reasons. Suddenly, cultivated meat can open that up. Like, you do not have to raise cows and slaughter them to be able to get high quality beef, right? So, I mean, think about that one opportunity of what it can do for India. So those are the things I would think through and say, can you set up a protein valley? And if so, how would you challenge yourself to make it really attractive and irresistible for companies to come and set up their manufacturing in India? So that's what I would leave it with, Varun.
Yeah, thank you, Uma. I think that makes a lot of sense. The point about types of meat, even if we don't get into beef, which can be controversial, even if we talk about just really high quality meat that is not accessible right now to everyone in India, and let's face it, is a very aspirational good that people want to consume, right? So as people get richer and richer, as their incomes continue to rise, they want to eat more meat. And that's as true in an urban slum in Mumbai as it is in any other part of the world, right? So I think there's this opportunity. Why not give everyone bluefin tuna, right? An extremely high quality aspirational meat. I know that's not what Upside is specifically focusing on as a species, but of course your platform translates to a number of different species eventually. But the point here is high quality meat for everyone.
Yeah, that's really important, right? I mean, I don't want to downplay the importance of when you have an extra, 100 rupees in your pocket or an extra $1, the first thing that a parent goes and buys is meat or chicken, right? To feed their family, because higher quality protein, tastier protein, things that you aspire for. So once there's a couple of extra dollars or extra rupees in your pocket, it's actually not going to buy an iPhone or so. It's actually going to go and buy meat. So that's really the appeal that meat has in our culture, and being able to say you could have real meat and without compromise on taste and without compromise on nutrition, that's a very big opportunity.
What's going to stop us, Uma? Let's say it's 2030 and we failed in getting to those numbers, or let's look even further out, 2040 and we failed. What are the failure modes here? Why haven't we succeeded?
Yeah, great question, Varun. I think some of the ones that immediately come to mind and that keep me up are the inability to fund the industry's growth. Look, what we're trying to pull off on a global scale and humanity's scale is incredible. It's one of the biggest, most ambitious projects ever taken in the history of humanity. And there are going to be many skeptics, but every step so far in the last 5.5 years, we've shown that the cultivated meat has moved at a pace that no other innovation in food has ever moved in the last 200 years. Now, it's not going to keep moving at that pace unless there is funding. So the number one thing that I think I can slow down this, I wouldn't think it'll stop it, but it'll slow it down, is the pace of funding that comes into this industry and the support from very large public and private entities to develop the infrastructure needed, the regulations needed to bring this into the world, and also being able to develop a workforce that can find high value, high paying jobs, much safer jobs. Those are the ones that I think can really slow this industry down. And those are the ones that keep me up. Science, technology, engineering, and scale up used to be the ones that kept me up in the last 5 years. Science and technology, I think we've de-risked that to the most extent possible before you build a very large production facility and start de-risking the scale up. But those I see as inevitable. But the things that can really slow us down is the 4 things I mentioned, lack of funding at the pace we need, the lack of public-private partnerships in able to, ease the entry of this field into the world. That requires a lot of political will and requires the political gumption and courage to withstand a lot of skepticism. And then number 3 is being able to create a path with the regulators to make sure that an industry like this almost requires, like if you think through, it requires an approval very similar to how COVID vaccines have received an approval, where they got an approval on an emergency use authorization basis. And that's the level of urgency we need to have with governments across the world, that we need to have an emergency use authorization for a cultivated meat field. And then the last one, of course, is the talent and the workforce that needs to develop to be able to sustain the growth here. So those are the four things I would point out very clearly are the ones that could slow us down.
So, I mean, Uma, that's what we love to hear at the ecosystem level is we need to really go mission mode on all of this, right? And I agree with you 100%. But for my last question, I know that people in the audience are also going to want to know, they're going to be very interested in knowing what kind of partners are you looking for in places like India? Because you mentioned companies like Upside Foods all over the world would certainly be interested in at least exploring the possibility of entering India. So what sort of partners are you looking for?
Absolutely. So we would love to have partners reach out to us if you're able to do anything related to food manufacturing, feed manufacturing, which means media is a big deal for cultivated meat. Media is a mix of a number of high value ingredients, like if you're an amino acid manufacturer that can manufacture high quality amino acids. If you're a fatty acid manufacturer that can kind of develop lipids for us. If you can do vitamins and mineral supplementation, or if you are able to run GMP scale production facilities that make recombinant proteins where growth factors can be made. Those are very easy, low hanging fruit if you want to be able to work with us on that and in the industry broadly. And then if there's steel is going to be an important thing here. Like we are trying to build physical production facilities like this. So being able to look at opportunities of, could you manufacture production scale equipment and quality at the level of quality assurance needed for cultivators or piping, valves? I think that's a very clear opportunity. And then lastly, I'd say, if there are people that would like to be able to say, look, we want to be able to supply flavors and spices for the industry to make it more regional. I think, India and Indian foods are popular across the world. And I think finding an opportunity to bring it into cultivated meat, I think there's a very nice collaboration there that can be done. On the individual level, institutes or academic institutions, being able to start saying, we want to be able to develop the workforce, start undergrad and postgraduate training programs in this space, and maybe collaborating with the companies to say, could you come and work with our talent force? Because it's in mutual best interest to do so. Those are the four areas I would immediately point out. And then on the regulator side, regulators actively engaging with us, engaging with the FDA, engaging with other regulatory agencies in the world to see how fast this field is moving, I think would be incredibly helpful. And lastly, at every opportunity you get, try to see if you can go and taste cultivated meat. You have to understand what this is. The experience is magical. So go into a high quality producer of cultivated meat, and any opportunity you get, being able to taste that and then share it with your family and friends, I think is absolutely going to be an essential one for people to believe in this field. And then if you're thinking of a business partnership, you need to believe first. So you should seek out. When you come to the United States, reach out to us and say, hey, could we come and do a tasting? We're very interested in this. It starts with that.
Uma, thank you so much for everything you're doing, turning science fiction into reality in service of a better planet. Thank you for joining us from this epic facility. Really love that all the progress that you're making in advancing this new industry. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Varun. It's my pleasure. And I can't wait for the day where we have a protein valley that starts building its roots in India.